Why did the commander freeze in the doorway of a quiet VA clinic, as if he'd just seen a ghost no one else recognized? The fluorescent lights hummed above the waiting room in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Veterans shifted in their chairs. A television murmured the morning news to no one in particular. And behind the front desk, Sloan updated a chart with the steady focus of someone who believed paperwork deserved the same precision as battlefield medicine. She didn't look up when the door opened, but she felt it. A shift in pressure, a change in the air, the subtle gravity that enters a room when someone accustomed to command steps inside and never quite stops commanding. The man said. Her pen stopped mid-word. She looked up slowly. 63. Civilian clothes worn like a temporary disguise, silver hair, a long scar disappearing beneath his jacket cuff, eyes that didn't wander, they assessed. Him too, Sloan. She stood. I've been out 4 years, she replied evenly. It's just Sloan. I know, he said. I've been looking for you for 5. The waiting room felt smaller. His name was Reed, retired commander, formerly of SEAL Team 2, a man whose career was measured in operations few people would ever read about and sacrifices no ceremony could fully contain. He didn't sit until she did. In September 2019, he began, outside Kandahar province. And just like that, the clinic dissolved. The fluorescent lights became a moonless sky over Afghanistan. The hum of electricity turned into distant rotor wash. The antiseptic scent faded into dust and iron and cordite. She was on her knees again. A man bleeding out beneath her hands, femoral, 9 seconds if she hesitated. She hadn't hesitated. She never did. Tourniquet 2 turns, 3, gauze packed deep, pressure with both palms, calm voice into the radio, south side now. And above them, on elevated ground, a hostile adjusting position. 900 meters, variable crosswind, partial cover, upper thorax visible. She had held 2 realities at once. One hand closing a wound, the other preparing to end a threat. She hadn't told anyone about the second part. The official report never mentioned it, but leaned forward in the clinic consultation room and said quietly, "You took shrapnel to your left arm. 4 minutes later, you eliminated the shooter at 900 meters, 11-knot crosswind." She didn't blink. "The report credits suppressive fire from the lead vehicle," she said. "I know what I saw." Silence stretched between them. "Why does it matter now?" she asked. He studied her for a long moment. "Because I'm advising a composite unit at camp. They need a medic." A pause. "And someone who can do both." She felt it then, the old friction under her skin, the tension between who she had been trained to become and who she had promised herself she would not be. "I'll think about it," she said. But she already knew. She had known the moment he spoke her name, like a memory he'd been carrying. 2 days later, she drove through the gates at camp 15 minutes early. Some habits were bone deep. The warehouse staging area smelled like oil and canvas. 6 men turned when she entered. Lieutenant Master Sergeant Briggs, young and eager, hale, watchful chief, quiet as deep water. They looked at her the way men sometimes look at someone who doesn't fit the silhouette they expected. Said, "We've been briefed." Not welcomed. Briefed. She didn't react. She had grown used to skepticism. It didn't bruise her anymore. It clarified the work ahead. By midday, she'd already identified early heat exhaustion in before he recognized it himself. 40 minutes of subtle observation, small tells, the delayed reach for water, the sheen of sweat, the jaw tension. She corrected it quietly. Briggs watched her with arithmetic in his eyes. Verdict pending. That afternoon, as October light thinned across the range, she finished her notes beside a table of cased equipment. Except one rifle wasn't cased. An M24 rested alone at the far end. She became aware of it, the way you become aware of a word you've been avoiding. Her hand moved before she decided. 3 inches from the stock. And stopped. 3 inches between what she had been and what she had promised at a graveside at 13 she would no longer be. Her father's voice surfaced, uninvited. Steady hands. She pulled her hand back. When she turned, Chief was 20 feet behind her. Watching. He said nothing, but something in his expression shifted, not suspicion, recognition. That night, Reed sat alone under a single lamp, holding an envelope he had carried for 15 years. Had handed it to him in 2009. Give it to her when she's ready, her father had said. Not skilled enough, ready. Had commanded men in combat. He had made decisions that cost lives. But he had never carried anything heavier than that envelope. Not yet, he thought. Soon. The live fire exercise on day 9 changed everything. Sergeant went down with a ruined ankle mid-scenario. The designated marksman position empty. Targets unresolved at 820 meters. Looked at her. The question hung unspoken. She looked at the 30 pounds of precision. She remembered being 11 years old, her father adjusting her shoulder alignment. Rocks under the bipod. Crosswinds when the range was empty. You squeeze a trigger, he'd said. You don't pull it. She went prone. First shot 14 inches right. Briggs exhaled. She cycled the bolt. Breath, heart rate, wind pattern. The silence between gusts. She squeezed. Second shot, center mass. The range report confirmed it. No celebration, no commentary. She stood and returned to her kit. Where did you learn to do that? Asked. My father, she said simply. What she didn't know yet was that her father's name had been erased from her understanding of him. And hers from the record. Found it first, the inconsistency in the Kandahar after-action report. The geometry didn't match. The timing didn't align. Briggs had written it. He had seen her make the shot and had decided it wasn't credible. A 22-year-old corpsman with no documented marksmanship record eliminating an elevated threat at 900 meters under crosswind after taking shrapnel. He had believed what he saw, but not enough to write it down. I protected the accuracy of the record as I understood it, Briggs said quietly when confronted. You removed her from her own history, replied. Briggs nodded once. I was wrong. Sloane sensed the change before anyone told her. Rooms had signatures, and this one shifted when Briggs stopped looking at her dismissively and started not looking at her at all. Called her into the command space that afternoon. I need to show you something, he said. He handed her a classified version of her father's service file. Not the summary she'd received at 13. The real one. Force Recon, MARSOC transfer, specialized operations. Structured training beginning in 2005. He hadn't just taken her to the range. He had built her deliberately. Not because he wanted a soldier for a daughter, said, because he knew who you were becoming. She felt something inside her rearrange. I made a promise, she said quietly. I know, replied, he knew too. That evening, after a CASVAC scenario turned real, and she treated while taking a grazing round to her own shoulder. After she moved 6 steps to the and eliminated a threat at 1,100 meters under 12-knot gusting wind. After she returned to the wound without waiting for confirmation. After all of that, placed the envelope on the table. Her name written in her father's hand. Sloane. He left her alone to open it. The paper was warm. If you're reading this, the letter began, I'm gone, and some time has passed. He told her He knew what he was doing when he trained her. That she had made the right promise for the wrong reason. That when the right reason came, she wouldn't be breaking it. She would be fulfilling it. "You were not born to choose between healing and protecting," he wrote. "Both hands, Sloane. The ones that close wounds and the ones that hold steady on the weapon. Don't let the world reduce you to one." She didn't cry. What she felt was older than tears. A door opening in a house she thought was dark. The next morning, placed the amended Kandahar report on the table. Her name restored. Distance, wind, injury, outcome. No speeches. Just truth written down. Briggs looked at her across the table, not with arithmetic now. With acknowledgement. After the meeting, she stepped outside into sharp October air. Her shoulder ached. Her chest felt lighter. Joined her. "I found the evidence in 2019, he said. "I just needed to find the person." She looked out over the range. "I'm not interested in being a legend," she said quietly. "I know. I'm interested in being useful." He nodded once. Weeks later, she returned to the VA clinic part-time, splitting her hours between training rotations and the quiet fluorescent hum of civilian medicine. One afternoon, a patient paused at her doorway. 63 years old. Silver hair. Scar on his left forearm. He held her gaze for a long moment. "You saved my life," he said. She didn't correct him. She didn't explain which part. She just nodded. "Sit down," she said gently. "Let's take a look at that shoulder." Because in the end, the work was the point. Not the recognition. Not the record. Not even redemption. Just the steady presence of someone who knows when to close a wound and when to hold the line. Sometimes strength isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't argue with the world. Sometimes it simply acts. And dignity. Dignity doesn't need to be written in reports. It lives in steady hands. Both of them. Why did the rifle feel heavier in her hands this time, when she knew she could carry it? The morning after's visit, Sloane arrived at the staging warehouse at 6:45, as she always did, 15 minutes early. The Carolina air carried a thin edge of cold, not winter yet, but close enough to suggest it was thinking about it. Inside, the warehouse lights hummed to life one row at a time. She set her medical kit on the central table and began her quiet ritual inventory by touch, not sight. Tourniquets aligned, gauze stacked, chest seals checked, saline secured. It wasn't superstition. It was calibration. If her hands knew where everything was without searching, her mind could stay free for the variables no one could predict. Across the room, Master Sergeant Briggs watched her without speaking. His skepticism had shifted. It no longer felt dismissive. It felt evaluative. She preferred that. Lieutenant entered at 6:58 sharp. No wasted movement, no wasted words. "Live fire progression today," he said. "Eastern corridor, increased distance, limited comms." He didn't look at her when he added, "Medical integrated." Integrated. Not attached, not observing. Integrated. She felt the word settle somewhere deeper than it should have. They rolled out at 800. The eastern corridor of the range opened into long stretches of uneven ground framed by low tree lines and shallow ridges. October light filtered pale and flat through scattered cloud cover, flattening shadows and making distance deceptive. Sloane moved rear left of the main element, eyes scanning without appearing to scan. Was better hydrated today. Jaw tension normal, good. Hale's breathing pattern was steady but shallow, adrenaline riding under the surface. Understandable. Briggs carried his rifle like an extension of himself, comfortable, certain. Remained the quiet constant at the edge of formation, absorbing more than he revealed. And Sloane. Sloane carried two tool sets. the medic bag at her hip, and the memory of steel and wind under her skin. The first simulated contact hit at 400 meters. Hand signals were crisp. The team flowed into position with practiced economy. Sloan tracked angles and bodies simultaneously, who had cover, who didn't, who was overexposing without realizing it. Dropped as designated casualty. Only this time, the ground betrayed him. The wet slope shifted under his weight. His controlled fall twisted wrong. The sound he made wasn't simulated. Sloan was already moving before the echo faded. 11 seconds to reach him. On her knees. Primary survey in sequence. Airway clear, breathing fast but stable. Obvious right knee trauma but obvious injuries lied. Her fingers swept his left thigh and felt warmth where there shouldn't be warmth. She cut fabric. Venous bleed, heavy, not arterial, not yet catastrophic, but unforgiving. Cat, she said. Hale placed it in her palm in 3 seconds. Good. Tourniquet high and tight, twist, secure, gauze packed deep, pressure with both hands. 2 minutes 40 seconds since impact. Her world narrowed to compression and color and time. And then, movement on the north ridge. Peripheral at first. A shift against the skyline. She saw it before anyone else did. A hostile silhouette settling into elevated advantage. She opened her mouth to call it. The shot came first. A white-hot slash tore across her left shoulder. Shrapnel sprayed from concrete 2 feet away. The body registers injury before the mind names it. Burning clarity. She did not look. Pain was information, not instruction. The threat on the ridge adjusted position. She had 20 seconds before the next round came clean. She looked at. No words. She placed his hands on his wound pack, pressing his palms into position. Exactly this, she said, don't let up. He nodded once. She stood. 6 steps to the. 6 steps that felt like crossing a line she had once promised never to cross again. The rifle lay where it had been staged. M82, a 1.50 caliber, bipod already set. She went prone. Scope view flooded her vision. 1,100 meters. Overcast sky, wind northwest 12 knots gusting to 15. Irregular. Upper thorax and head visible above partial cover. Her left shoulder trembled once, not weakness. Her father's voice surfaced, steady as breath. The weapon doesn't care if you're hurt. You tell it what you've got. She shifted her weight. Adjusted natural point of aim to accommodate what her left arm could still give. It wasn't ideal. It was real. She breathed in for 4. Heart rate descending. Incorporate the pain. Not fight it, not deny it. Use it. First shot. 8 inches off. She knew it the instant the trigger broke. No self-criticism, no hesitation. Cycle the bolt. Find the silence between gusts. There. That narrow window when the wind pauses, as if inhaling. She squeezed. Second shot. Clean. She didn't wait for confirmation. She was already moving. 6 steps back. Both hands returning to his thigh as if they had never left. Stay with me, she said. He blinked up at her, shock in his eyes, not from pain. From something else. From the understanding that she had just done something he hadn't known she could do. Or maybe something he hadn't known anyone could do. Called the exercise shortly after. Debrief was clinical. Timeline positions, response gaps. When they reached the neutralization of the elevated threat, his gaze rested on her for half a second longer than necessary. No applause. No commentary. Just acknowledgement. Her shoulder was cleaned and dressed by Hale later in the medical bay. He worked carefully, hands steady but jaw tight. "You didn't even flinch," he said quietly. "Yes, I did," she replied. He looked confused. "Inside," she added. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Outside, rain began to fall. Not heavy, just steady, as if the sky had decided to sit with them for a while. That evening, Briggs approached her while she completed documentation. He didn't hover. He stood directly in front of her. "In 2019, he said, voice level, "I wrote the after-action report." She kept writing. "I know." He blinked once. "I excluded your shot from the record." Her pen paused. "I believed what I saw," he continued, "but I didn't believe it was possible, not under those conditions, not from you." There it was. Not cruel. Not loud. Just honest. She looked up at him. "And now," she asked. "Now I know I was wrong." Silence stretched. Rain tapping on metal roof panels overhead. "I'll amend it," he said. "Already have, actually." He placed a folder on the table. Her name typed in black ink beneath distance and wind, and injury and outcome. Restored. She studied it without visible emotion. "Thank you," she said. Not warmly, not coldly. Accurately. He exhaled, not relief, release. After he left, she sat alone for a moment longer. Her shoulder throbbed dully beneath the dressing. She placed her right hand flat over her left. Both hands. She had thought the promise she made at 13 meant choosing one forever. Healing. Not fighting. But today she had done both. Not recklessly. Not for pride. Because the moment required it. And something in her no longer felt divided. Later that night, she found in the command space. The lamp cast long shadows across the table. "You were right," he said quietly. "About what?" she asked. "That someone capable of doing both exists outside of theory." She leaned back slightly. "I don't feel extraordinary," she admitted. "Good," he replied. "Extraordinary people make bad long-term teammates." That almost made her smile. He studied her shoulder. "You'll heal," he said. "Yes. And the rest of it?" She hesitated. "I'm still deciding," she answered honestly. He nodded once. "That's fair." She left him there with the lamp and the quiet. Back in her quarters, she removed her jacket and stood before the small mirror over the sink. The dressing on her shoulder was clean. Controlled. Manageable. She met her own eyes. Ignored. Anxious. Determined. Proud. Broken. Hopeful. All of it lived there. None of it owned her. She turned off the light and lay down without turning on the television or reaching for her phone. Rain continued outside. Somewhere in the dark, she imagined her father sitting at a kitchen table years ago, pressing down gently on her shoulder as she learned to compensate for imbalance. "Both hands," he had said. Not as a command. As a truth. The next morning would bring new scenarios. New variables. New doubts from men who hadn't yet seen enough. But something fundamental had shifted. She no longer felt like she was trespassing in two worlds. She felt integrated. And integration, she was beginning to understand, wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about no longer arguing with yourself. The rifle would still feel heavy. The tourniquet would still cut into her palm. The wind would still move unpredictably. But her hands knew. And this time she didn't pull them back. Why did the rain make everything quieter except her thoughts? The third week arrived heavy with weather that didn't rush in and leave but settled. By dawn the range was soaked through, mud pulling at boots, low clouds pressing the sky closer to the earth. Distance looked shorter in gray light. It was. Sloane had been awake since 3:15. Not restless, not panicked. Awake. She sat at the small desk in her quarters with a legal pad in front of her and a pen resting across the top. She didn't write. She listened. Her father used to call it keeping the channel open. Don't force the answer, he'd say. Don't close the question either. She sipped coffee that had gone lukewarm and let the rain talk against the window. She had thought the hardest part would be picking up the rifle again. It was. The hardest part was accepting that she didn't resent it anymore. By 6:50 she was in the staging area, boots damp, jacket zipped high against the wind. The team gathered around the central table as briefed the morning scenario. CASVAC integration, he said. Simulated contact, route deviation, extraction under pressure. Less cinematic, more critical. In real life, the difference between living and dying was often measured not in heroics, but in minutes. 11 of them. The column stepped off at 800. The rain had softened the eastern corridor into something treacherous. The grass concealed slick depressions. The to the north blurred at the edges in mist. Sloane moved rear left, scanning as she always did, a continuous low-level assessment of bodies in motion. Snee was braced, movement careful but stable. Hale's breathing had evened out since the previous week. Growth rarely announced itself, but she noticed it. Briggs no longer watched her to measure her. He watched the field. As always, saw everything. Simulated contact, initiated at the worst possible stretch of open ground. By design. Was the designated casualty again. Only this time, reality ignored the script. When he dropped, his right knee slipped in mud. His body twisted wrong. The sound he made cut through the rain. Sloane was moving before anyone else recalibrated. Distance closed in seconds. Primary survey. Airway clear, breath present, knee damaged but something else. Her fingers found heat through soaked fabric at the left thigh. She cut. Blood welled, darker than arterial but urgent. Femoral vein. Serious. Not dramatic. Deadly if neglected. Cat, she said. Hale's hand was already there. Good. High and tight. Twist. Secure. Gauze packed deep. Pressure. Time running in silent rhythm beneath her focus. And then, movement north ridge. She saw it first again. A silhouette adjusting. Weapon oriented toward the cluster around the casualty. The most dangerous priority. She opened her mouth to call. The shot cracked. Impact felt before heard. A searing line tore across her left shoulder. Shrapnel bit into muscle. The world didn't slow. It narrowed. Pain. Location. Depth. Not arterial. Manageable. 20 seconds before the hostile settled into clean alignment. She looked at. No words. She guided his hands into position over the wound pack. Exactly this, she said. Don't let up. He didn't hesitate. She stood. 6 steps to the. Rain slicked the bipod feet into mud. She dropped prone. Scope view swam briefly before settling. 1,100 meters. Overcast distortion. Crosswind northwest, gusting irregular. Upper thorax visible. Left shoulder unstable. She felt the tremor in it, not weakness, adaptation required. Her father's voice rose through memory, calm and infuriatingly patient. The weapon doesn't know you're hurt. You tell it what you've got. She shifted weight. Adjusted geometry. Found a new natural point of aim that cooperated with injury instead of resisting it. This wasn't the clean range of childhood. This was compromise. And compromise wasn't failure. It was reality. She inhaled 4 seconds. Heart rate descending. Wind gust. Pause. First shot. 8 inches off. No reaction from her. Cycle. Correct. Find the silence between gusts. There. She squeezed. The second shot broke clean through rain and distance. She didn't watch for the outcome. She was already moving back. Both hands replacing. Pressure reestablished. Stay with me, she said too. His eyes were wide. You're okay, she told him, not gently, as fact. The exercise halted minutes later. Debrief was subdued. Rain continued steady against the warehouse roof. Laid out the timeline. When he reached the threat neutralization, he paused half a breath longer than usual. Executed under compromised conditions, he said simply. No embellishment. No praise. It was enough. Later in the medical bay, Hale dressed her shoulder carefully. You keep doing that, he said quietly. Doing what? Moving toward the worst part. She considered that. I move toward what needs doing, she corrected. He nodded, absorbing that distinction. Briggs entered once Hale finished. He stood at the foot of the treatment table. I amended the 2019 report, he said. She had known he would. It's in the system. She met his eyes. Why now, she asked. He didn't deflect. Because accuracy isn't about protecting what I think is possible, he said. It's about recording what happened. A beat. I was wrong about you. There was no drama in it. Just wait. She studied him for a moment. Noted, she said. And she meant it. Forgiveness wasn't a ceremony. It was a... That night called her into the command space. The lamp cast warm light across the table. He didn't sit. He placed the envelope between them. Her name written in her father's compact, precise hand. Sloan. The sight of it stole something from her lungs. I've carried this 15 years, said. He asked me to give it to you when you were ready, not skilled, ready. She swallowed. And now, she asked. I'm not wrong about this. He left her alone. The room felt too small. She sat. Picked up the envelope. The paper was worn soft from years in a jacket pocket. She opened it carefully. One page. Handwriting she hadn't seen since she was 13. Sloan. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and some time has passed. She read it once without stopping. Then again slower. He knew what he was building in her. Not a soldier. Not just a medic. A person who could do both. You made the right promise for the wrong reason. He wrote about the vow she'd made at his graveside. When the right reason comes, you won't be breaking it. You'll be fulfilling it. Her throat tightened, not grief exactly. Recognition. You were not born to choose between healing and protecting. Both hands. The world will ask you to choose. Don't. She let the letter fall to her lap. For 17 years, she had believed honoring him meant rejecting half of what he'd taught her. She had misunderstood. He had never trained her for war. He had prepared her for reality. And reality sometimes required both hands. She folded the letter along its original creases. Pressed it against her chest. Not broken. Not torn between worlds. Integrated. The next morning, convened the team. 2 documents on the table. The amended Kandahar report. Her name restored. Distance, wind, injury, outcome. And a recommendation for a new designation, Integrated Combat Specialist. Briggs stood. I wrote the original report, he said. I decided what was credible based on who I believed capable. I was wrong. No excuses. Just truth. He placed his signed correction on the table. I'm sorry. She met his gaze. Understood, she said. Rose next. He crossed the room and placed something small and gold in front of her. A trident pin. Worn. Carried. Heavy beyond its weight. He said nothing. He didn't need to. She picked it up with her right hand. Both hands, she thought. 6 months later, the rain had long passed. Her shoulder healed clean. The dark circles under her eyes faded. She stood at the front of a purpose-built classroom, 16 chairs arranged in a semicircle. On the board in her handwriting, heal when you can, fight when you must, never choose. Integrated Combat Medicine, Cycle 1. Hale sat in the front row, pen ready. She taught for 90 minutes without pause. About preparation. About training the body and the mind to stop arguing with each other. About how the decision isn't made in the moment of crisis. It's made long before. After class, Hale asked, how do you decide which one to do when you can't do both? You don't decide then, she said. You decide now, in training, so when the moment comes, your hands already know. That night, she called her mother. I've been carrying a rifle again, she said. Silence. Not shocked. Just listening. Your father once told me, her mother replied softly, that when the reason is right, the thing you do becomes part of the right thing, not separate from it. Sloane stood by the window, looking out at a clear Carolina sky. He was right, her mother added. He usually was, Sloane said. Later, alone in her quarters, she took the letter from her breast pocket. Didn't reread it. Just held it. Steady hands he'd written, both of them. She placed her right hand over her left. Felt the strength in both. The difference now wasn't what she could do. It was what she understood about herself. She no longer felt divided. She felt complete. And sometimes completeness isn't loud. It doesn't demand applause. It simply stands in the rain, absorbs the impact, and keeps working. Because dignity doesn't argue with doubt. It answers it quietly, with steady hands. What happens when the mission isn't on the range, and no one is pretending anymore? The call came at 2:17. No preamble, no rehearsal. Real coordinates, real time, real blood. Sloane was already awake. Some habits never leave, they just soften at the edges. She had learned to sleep lightly, not anxious, not afraid, just ready. His voice over the secure line was level. Training suspended, wheels up in 90, integrated team. Integrated. The word felt different now, not a test, not a debate. A fact. By 3:40, the rotors were cutting through coastal air, low and steady. The cabin lights were dimmed to red. Across from her, Hale checked straps with quiet hands. Sat rigid, jaw set, knee braced but uncomplaining. Briggs stared at nothing, already somewhere ahead of the aircraft. Met her eyes once. No words. Just alignment. The target was a maritime transfer point, not high profile, not dramatic. Intelligence suggested weapons moving through a chain that had already cost lives overseas. The plan was interception and capture. Controlled. Contained. Plans are always clean at altitude. Below, the sea was ink black and restless. Sloane ran through contingencies in her head. Hemorrhage control, airway compromise, hypothermia, secondary threat. She wasn't rehearsing fear, she was clearing space. But beneath the procedural rhythm, something else moved. A quiet tremor she hadn't felt since Kandahar. Not doubt. Memory. The last time she deployed outside a controlled environment, she had come home without her father. She pressed her palms together once, grounding. You are not 13 anymore. The insertion was precise. fast-roping onto the rust-streaked deck of a decommissioned cargo vessel that had been repurposed for things no one would admit to. The sea slapped against steel in uneven bursts. Within seconds, they were moving. Stacked, controlled, silent. The first compartment cleared without resistance. The second didn't. The crack of live rounds inside metal corridors is different from training. It doesn't echo clean. It ricochets through bone. Returned fire from cover. Hale pulled a detainee down hard. Briggs moved left, clearing angles with ruthless efficiency. Sloane stayed rear left until she didn't. A shout. Hale stumbled back, one hand at his side. Blood seeped dark through his glove. Not simulated. Not controlled. She was there before the thought finished forming. Down, she ordered. He obeyed without pride. She cut fabric. Entry wound lower abdomen. No clear exit. Bad. Very bad. Round still cracking overhead. She felt the old split-second fork in the road. Rifle or hands? Protect or heal? Her father's letter flickered through her mind. You won't be breaking it, you'll be fulfilling it. She dragged Hale behind thicker steel, using her body as leverage and shield. Suppress right corridor, she called. Her voice didn't shake. Inside, something did. She opened her kit. Gloves slick, light too dim. She forced herself to slow down. Airway intact. Breathing rapid but present. Pulse fast, thready. Stay with me, she said. I'm here, he muttered, teeth clenched. The firefight shifted down the passage. Briggs' voice cut through comms. Contact moving aft. Sloane packed the wound, hands deep and unflinching. Blood was warm against her knuckles. Real, immediate. Not theory. Hale gasped once. Look at me, she said. He did. And in his eyes she saw it fear, yes, but also trust. Not in the team. In her. Pressure. Seal. Stabilize. She worked by feel as much as sight. But the corridor ahead went suddenly quiet. Too quiet. She felt it before she saw it. A shadow shifting at the edge of peripheral vision. Weapon angled toward them. The most vulnerable point. She didn't think. She moved. Her left shoulder absorbed the recoil before the pain registered. The shot was short distance, clean, controlled. The threat dropped. Silence crashed in after the echo. Her ears rang. Her hands were already back inside Hale's wound, maintaining pressure. She had done both. Not sequentially. Simultaneously. Thundered back toward them. Status demanded. Alive, she replied. Not optimistic. Accurate. Extraction became the only objective. They moved Hale on a makeshift litter through narrow steel corridors slick with seawater and something darker. Sloane stayed at his side, one hand maintaining pressure, the other steadying the IV line she'd placed with muscle memory and stubborn calm. The sea had grown rougher. The deck tilted unpredictably. Helicopter blades returned as a distant thrum. Minutes felt elastic. She didn't pray. She counted. Respirations. Pulse. Seconds between them. On the flight back, Hale drifted. Don't, she said quietly. His eyes fluttered open. You're not done. He tried to smile. Bossy, he whispered. Efficient, she corrected. At the hospital, fluorescent lights replaced rotor noise. Surgeons took over in a blur of competence and urgency. Sloane stood outside the ore doors, hands finally empty. The absence felt heavier than the rifle ever had. Blood dried dark against her sleeves. Briggs approached slowly. You took the shot, he said. Yes. And you didn't stop treating him. No. He studied her. Most people freeze at that fork. She looked down at her hands. They argue with themselves, she said. I stopped arguing. He nodded once. Hours later, exited the surgical wing. He'll live. The words didn't explode with relief. They settled. Sloane closed her eyes briefly. Not dramatic. Just enough. Back at base, debrief was stripped of embellishment. Timeline. Engagement points. Medical intervention. When reached her dual action in the corridor, he didn't romanticize it. Decision under pressure, he said, executed without ego. That mattered more than praise. Later, alone in her quarters, she peeled off blood-stiffened fabric and stood under scalding water. The heat stung her shoulder, where old scar tissue still remembered impact. She let it. She wasn't shaking. That surprised her. Instead, there was a quiet ache behind her ribs. Not from fear. From the memory of Hale's eyes. Trust like that is a weight. You don't carry it lightly. She stepped out of the shower and sat on the edge of the bed, towel wrapped around her shoulders. For years she had believed strength meant suppressing conflict, choosing one path and burying the other. But tonight had been different. There was no internal debate. No guilt after the trigger pull. No shame in the blood on her hands. Only clarity. Her phone buzzed once. A message from. He doesn't remember much after you said, "Look at me," but he remembers your voice. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Voice. Not the shot. Not the chaos. Her voice. The next morning, she visited Hale in recovery. He was pale, tubes threaded around him like quiet machinery. He blinked when she entered. You look terrible, he croaked. She almost laughed. You're welcome. Silence stretched between them, comfortable, fragile. You didn't hesitate, he said finally. She considered that. I used to, she admitted. He studied her face, as if searching for the place she meant. What changed? She thought of the letter. Of the range in the rain. Of Briggs' apology. Of the 13-year-old girl at a graveside promising something she didn't fully understand. I stopped trying to prove which part of me was real, she said. They both are. Hale nodded faintly. Good, he whispered, because I'm glad both were there. When she left the hospital, the sky was painfully blue. No rain, no wind. Just open air. She stood for a moment in the parking lot, sunlight warming her face. The mission report would be filed. The intelligence chain would move forward. Names would be redacted. But something quieter had happened. Not a heroic transformation. Not a cinematic redemption. Just a woman standing at the place where healing and force intersect, and refusing to abandon either. She reached into her jacket pocket and felt the folded letter. Didn't take it out. Didn't need to. The words lived somewhere steadier now. The world will ask you to choose. Don't. She walked back toward base without rushing. The sea would move again. Missions would come again. Fear would visit again. But she no longer mistook fear for division. Sometimes courage isn't loud. It doesn't roar down corridors. It kneels in blood and stands in gunfire without changing shape. And when the moment splits in two, it doesn't ask which half to save. It simply acts. What if saving him was the easy part and living with it was harder? Hale's hospital room smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. Machines breathed in soft mechanical rhythms. Sloane stood just inside the doorway, unsure why the threshold felt heavier than a combat deck. He was alive. Vitals stable, color returning slowly to his face. Mission accomplished. So why did her chest feel tight? He opened his eyes when she stepped closer, A faint grin tugged at his mouth. You hovering again. She almost smiled, monitoring. Right, he murmured, that. There was humor in it, but beneath that humor lived something fragile, the unspoken awareness that he had been close, closer than either of them wanted to admit. She checked the IV line, adjusted nothing, needed to touch something steady. You remember anything? She asked. Bits, he said, metal corridor loud, you telling me not to be dramatic. I didn't say that. You implied it. A pause. And I remember you saying, look at me. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. That's it. He studied her more closely now. There was a shot. She didn't respond. I didn't see it, he continued, but I felt safe. Safe. The word didn't fit the memory in her head. The steel corridor, the blood pooling under her knees, the recoil biting into her shoulder. Safe wasn't what she had felt. She had felt focused, split-second precise, balanced on a wire. But safe was what he remembered. And that mattered. After she left the hospital, the base felt altered. Not physically. Structurally, it was the same concrete, steel routine. But the air carried awareness now. The team looked at her differently. Not with skepticism. Not even with admiration. With Briggs found her in the equipment bay that afternoon. He leaned against the metal shelving, arms folded. You know what they're saying, he said. She didn't look up from cleaning her kit. I don't. They're saying you don't hesitate. She wiped down a pair of trauma shears carefully before answering. That's not true. He raised an eyebrow. I hesitate, she said, just earlier. He studied that for a moment. Meaning? Meaning the decision happens long before the moment. He nodded slowly, understanding deeper than the words. You scared them, he added. That made her pause. Why? Because you made it look simple. She met his eyes. It was. I know, he said quietly, but they don't see the argument that used to happen in your head. She didn't ask how he knew about that. Some battles leave visible patterns. That night she couldn't sleep. Not from adrenaline, that had burned off hours ago. It was the stillness that bothered her. When you survive chaos, silence feels suspicious. She sat at the edge of her bed and pulled the folded letter from her drawer. The creases were softer now, the ink slightly faded at the edges. You were not born to choose between healing and protecting. She closed her eyes. For years, she had thought integration meant peace. But integration wasn't peaceful. It was responsibility. On that deck in that corridor, she had made a lethal choice. Accurate, necessary, but lethal. And while she didn't regret it, she refused to pretend it weighed nothing. The next morning, called her into his office. He didn't waste time. Command is reviewing the maritime footage. She remained still. There will be commendations, he said, possibly public. Her jaw tightened slightly. I don't want that, she said. He studied her carefully. Why? Because the story will shrink, she replied. It'll turn into a clean headline. It wasn't clean. Leaned back in his chair. They'll say you saved him. I did, she said, but not alone and not without cost. He was quiet for a long time. You're aware, he said finally, that declining recognition won't stop them from seeing what happened. I know. Then what are you asking? She held his gaze. Accuracy. A faint shift in his expression. Meaning. Meaning if they tell it, they tell all of it. The training, the team, the risk. The fact that it wasn't bravery, it was preparation. He nodded once. That's fair. As she stood to leave, he added, You don't see yourself as a hero. No, she said simply. What do you see? She considered the question longer than she expected. A responsibility, she answered. Outside waited in the corridor. He handed her a small drive. Footage, he said, unedited. She looked at it, then back at him. Why? Because memory changes, he said. Video doesn't. That night alone she watched it. Helmet cams, corridor angles, audio fractured by gunfire. She saw herself drag Hale behind cover, saw her hands move with terrifying steadiness, saw the shadow shift in the frame. And then, the shot. Clinical. Controlled. Immediate. She didn't flinch watching it. But she didn't look away either. She let the full sequence play. No music, no narration, no drama. Just action. And consequence. When it ended, she sat in the dark. Her heart wasn't racing. Her breathing wasn't shallow. What she felt was something quieter. Acceptance. She had once believed that pulling a trigger would split her in half. Instead, it had clarified her shape. Later that week, Hale returned to base on limited duty. He moved slower, thinner but alive. The team gathered in the break room, nothing ceremonial, just proximity. Hale looked at her across the table. I owe you, he said. She shook her head immediately. No. He frowned slightly. I was bleeding out. You were trained, she said. You stayed with me. You fought to stay present. That's not nothing. A small silence followed. Cleared his throat. We all saw it. Saw what? She asked. You didn't choose between us and him, he said. You held both. Her chest tightened again. That's the job, she replied. No, Briggs said quietly. It's your version of it. The room settled into a thoughtful quiet. Not reverence. Recognition. Weeks passed. The mission report was finalized, language precise, no exaggeration. Her name appeared where it belonged, not elevated, not minimized. Accurate. She resumed training rotations, taught the next cycle of integrated combat medicine. One afternoon, a younger operative lingered after class. Ma'am, she said hesitantly, how do you live with it? With what? The part where you had to shoot. Sloane didn't rush the answer. You don't live with it by pretending it didn't matter, she said finally, and you don't live with it by letting it define you. The young woman waited. You live with it by remembering why, Sloane continued, and by making sure the why stays bigger than the act. That night, walking alone along the edge of base where marsh met sea, she let the wind press against her. The ocean was calmer than the night of the mission. But it still moved. Always moving. She thought about the 13-year-old girl who had promised never to become what war required. She hadn't betrayed her. She had grown her. Healing and force were never opposites. They were responses. Tools. The morality wasn't in the tool. It was in the intention. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Hale. Coffee tomorrow, my treat, since you hate medals. She smiled faintly. Maybe integration wasn't about eliminating conflict. Maybe it was about carrying it without letting it fracture you. She stopped at the edge of the water. The horizon stretched clean and endless. She placed her right hand over her left. Steady. Not untouched by what she had done. Not immune to doubt. But aligned. And alignment, she was learning, isn't the absence of weight. It's the decision to carry it without dropping who you are. What do you do when the noise fades, and the only thing left is who you are? The ceremony was smaller than command had first suggested. No press, no cameras, just a room with steel folding chairs and a flag pinned carefully against the wall, the kind of space where words mattered more because there were fewer of them. Sloane stood in the back before it began, hands clasped loosely behind her. She had argued against this, not aggressively, just persistently. Recognition made her uneasy, not because she felt undeserving, because she knew how easily stories became. Caught her eye from across the room. A subtle nod. Accurate, he'd promised. Hale stood near the front, still leaner than before, scar hidden beneath his uniform. Beside him, Briggs straight-backed, unreadable as ever, near the wall, watchful. Family had been invited. Her mother sat in the second row. That was the part she hadn't prepared for. When stepped to the front, he didn't inflate the moment. On the night of October 17th, he began evenly. An interdiction operation shifted from controlled to volatile. A team member sustained a life-threatening injury under active fire. He paused. In that moment, Specialist Sloan Mercer executed simultaneous threat neutralization and advanced hemorrhage control, contributing directly to the survival of her teammate. No heroic adjectives. No swelling rhetoric. Just fact. She appreciated that more than applause. When her name was called, she walked forward without rush. The medal felt heavier than she expected when it was placed in her palm. Metal always does. It carries memory. Held her gaze for a second longer than necessary. Accuracy, he said quietly, only for her. She inclined her head. When she turned, her mother was standing. Not clapping wildly. Just standing. Eyes bright. Proud in a way that didn't erase the cost. After the ceremony, conversations filled the room in low currents. Hale approached first. "You still hate medals?" he asked. "Yes." He grinned. "Good, means you're still you." Shook her hand harder than necessary. "Next time," he muttered, "I fall on purpose." "Don't," she replied dryly. Briggs waited until the others stepped back. "You changed the standard," he said. She met his eyes. "No," she answered, "I followed it." He studied her, as if recalibrating once more. "Fair," he said. Her mother reached her last. Up close, she looked smaller than Sloan remembered. Or maybe Sloan had grown in ways that made comparison inevitable. "You look tired," her mother said softly. "I am." Her mother touched the medal lightly, where it rested against Sloan's uniform. "Your father would have understood this," she said. Sloan swallowed. "For a long time, I thought he wouldn't." Her mother shook her head gently. "He trained you to be whole," she said, "not half safe." The words settled deep. Later that evening, the team gathered informally near the edge of the base, where marsh grass bent under coastal wind and the ocean stretched gray-blue into distance. No speeches. Just proximity. Handed her something small. A new trident pin. Unworn. "You don't have to carry the old one forever," he said. She looked at it. "I know." But she slipped the old one back into her pocket anyway. Not as weight. As history. As the sun lowered, Hale leaned back against the railing. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "Leaving what?" "This," he gestured loosely, "the balance." She considered it. "Balance isn't a location," she said. "It's a practice." He frowned thoughtfully. "You make everything sound like a class." She smiled faintly. "Occupational hazard." Silence stretched comfortably. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was standing between two worlds. She was standing in one. Complex. Demanding. But singular. Weeks passed. The noise around the mission faded, as noise always does. Training cycles continued. New recruits arrived with bright eyes and sharp edges. She taught them what she had learned the hard way. Not just how to apply pressure, but how to sit with pressure. One afternoon, a trainee asked, "How do you know when you're strong enough?" Sloan wiped her hands clean after a demonstration and considered the question. "You don't," she said. You prepare until the question matters less. The trainee blinked. You won't feel ready, Sloane continued. You'll feel responsible, that's different. That night, alone in her quarters, she laid the medal on the desk beside her father's letter. Metal and paper. Action and intention. She traced the crease in the letter gently. For years she had tried to honor him by narrowing herself. Reducing risk. Reducing conflict. But conflict wasn't the enemy. Division was. And she wasn't divided anymore. She thought back to the corridor on the ship. The shadow shifting. The split second. There had been no internal argument. No 13-year-old voice pleading for safety. Just clarity. She had not become harder. She had become aligned. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from next deployment window approaching, you in. She stared at the screen. The old version of her would have hesitated differently. Would have weighed healing against force like opposing charges. Now the calculation felt simpler. Not easier. Clearer. She typed back. I'm in. She set the phone down and stood at the window. Outside, the night was quiet. Not suspicious. Just still. She placed her right hand over her left. Felt the strength there. Felt the scars. Neither erased the other. In the reflection of the glass, she saw not a sniper. Not just a medic. Not a symbol. A woman who had stopped trying to amputate parts of herself to fit someone else's comfort. The world would keep presenting corridors. Some loud. Some silent. Some filled with blood. Some filled with doubt. She would walk into them the same way now. Not seeking heroism. Not chasing redemption. Simply prepared. Because strength isn't choosing one hand over the other. It's knowing when to use both. And dignity. Dignity doesn't announce itself with medals or gunfire. It stands steady in the space between healing and force. It absorbs the weight. It acts. And when the noise fades, it remains.